That day they laughed at me when I said that my father worked at the Pentagon. The teacher doubted it, and my classmates whispered, "He's probably just a janitor." But when he walked into the classroom, proudly, confidently, and with an ID that put all their doubts to rest, I realized that no one would laugh at my truth now. Today, I could feel every cell in my body trembling with excitement. I was the first again. "Carter," the teacher said, and her voice felt like it was squeezing my throat. I stood up, and each step to the board seemed harder than the last. The whole class was watching me, and there was an invisible tension in the air. "We have to talk about our parents," I said, gathering all my strength not to cry. I spoke proudly. "My dad works at the Pentagon." The classroom became quiet again, and I felt their eyes on me. And then the first laugh came from behind me. Then another one, and then another. I tried not to pay attention, but the teacher's voice sounded with an expression I knew well. It was a mixture of pity and misunderstanding. "The Pentagon, you say?" Her voice was too loud, with a hint of irony. "And maybe your dad is just a janitor there?" Those words hit me like a punch in the stomach. I knew they didn't believe me. How can you believe a 10-year-old boy when he says something so huge and unusual? How can you believe that your father is not just another clerk in the Pentagon, but someone who is really changing the course of history? Everyone was laughing, and this laughter felt like hot hands squeezing my chest. But I didn't say anything. I just stood there, looking at her contemptuous face, at her smug, open to criticism face. What could have changed that moment? She couldn't understand because she hadn't seen my father. She didn't know what he meant to the country, to me. All these years I was getting used to the fact that I have two faces. One for my parents, when I try to be strong and confident so as not to upset them. And the other is for the world. For people who don't want to hear the truth because it seems too big, too alien to them. Every time I came to school, I felt that my place here was not guaranteed. I saw how they all laughed, how they looked at me as if I had no right to be there, among them. I was one of the few who did not fit their ideal image. And today it happened again. The teacher laughed at me again. This laugh was like a blow. Her eyes were looking at me, but I didn't expect anything good from her anymore. She was sure that I was just making it up, that my father worked at the Pentagon. How could it be true? The son of an ordinary guy like me, in the walls where future leaders, diplomats, and businessmen are being educated? I returned to my seat, hunched over in pain, but then something changed. Everyone was laughing, but I could feel something changing in the air. I sat down at my desk, feeling that something was going to happen. I had a feeling in my heart that this was not the end, but only the beginning. I sat there, and they kept laughing. I started looking for support in my thoughts, but I couldn't find it until I heard what I had been waiting for. The classroom door suddenly opened, and my dad walked in. I didn't expect to see him here, but everything changed in an instant. He stood in the doorway, and everything around froze. Only now I realized that he had never been just anyone. The teacher's smile froze. Her eyes tried to understand who it was. And I realized that everything was about to change. My father was not just a man from the Pentagon. He was a man that no one would dare to insult. He had an importance they couldn't even imagine. "Hi, I'm Jonathan Carter. I work in Pentagon security," he said calmly, gracefully, and every word was silent in the room. I realized that now these people would realize who I am. They will see who my father is. And even if they don't fully understand it, they won't be able to laugh anymore. They will not be able to deny the truth. And then I felt everything fall into place. He walked in without a shadow of a doubt, silently, confidently, in a strict navy blue suit, with a badge that sparkled with every movement. The class fell silent. Even Tyler, who was always talking, put his hand over his mouth. My father always had a special posture. He didn't need words to make everyone feel that he was in charge. "I'm sorry to come unannounced," my dad said in a flat voice, "but I thought I'd tell you what I do." For the first time in a year, Ms. Andrews, our teacher, was confused. Her eyes fluttered and her voice broke. "And Mr. Carter, this is unexpected. We just—" "Malcolm, she stuttered. "Malcolm was telling the truth," Dad said calmly. "I work in the Pentagon cybersecurity division. And today I'm not just a father who decided to show up. I'm here for another reason." It sounded like the opening of a movie. All eyes turned to him. Even those who hadn't paid attention to me before looked at me differently now. But I could see the tension in my father's eyes. It wasn't just a show-off. Something was wrong. He came up to me and whispered quietly, "Do you remember what I told you? If you feel something, don't ignore it. Stay close to me." I nodded, not fully understanding what was happening. Dad turned to the class. "You may have heard about the recent attempts to hack into government systems. We have discovered that some of the attacks have been carried out with access to children's educational networks. This is the school of the future elite. And someone decided that this was a good entry point. Several parents who had been at the parent-teacher conference turned visibly pale. The classroom became alarmingly quiet. We received a signal about an attempted intervention in this particular school. The systems worked because I have personal security protocols in place. And so I am here not only as a parent, but also as a security officer. And so I ask you, stay in the classroom. This is not a drill. Ms. Andrews trembled. You mean, the threat is real? We don't know who's behind it yet, but we know that someone on the staff may have been involved, Dad replied, glancing toward the door. At the same moment, a shadow flashed outside the window. My dad gave me a short sign, unnoticeable to others, but we practiced these signals at home. I slid under the desk, holding my briefcase close to my chest like a shield. A few minutes later, another person entered the classroom, a woman in civilian clothes, a folder in her hands. She was not just a guest. Maria Ramirez, FBI, she introduced herself briefly. We're already working with the director. The building is under close control. We're asking everyone to stay in their classrooms until we're sure the situation is safe. I looked at Ms. Andrews, and she was no longer that confident teacher. She looked like someone who had just realized how blind she was. For the first time, I saw real shame in her eyes. While everyone was discussing what was happening, I felt Ethan, my friend, move closer to me. His voice was shaky but sincere. Malcolm. I told them you weren't lying. But now I see your dad. He's a real hero. I nodded silently. But in my heart I knew it was not over. What started as a humiliation in front of the class had turned into something much more serious. And I was right in the center of it. I was still shaking. Not from fear, but from injustice. They were laughing. They were scornful. But now they sat quiet as mice while my dad, the one they called the janitor, delivered FBI instructions to my classroom. I sat next to Ethan. He was nervously chewing on his pen, and I was clenching my fist under my desk. I was torn, on the one hand, pride, on the other, anger. Because now they believed. But not because of me. They had to see the badge and the motorcade to believe in my truth. Black truth is always in doubt until it is backed up by position or pathos. Malcolm, Ethan whispered. Did you see that? Ramirez has a transmitter in her ear. They're really cooking something up. I know, I said, something big. At that moment, the classroom door opened a second time, abruptly, without knocking. The school security guard, Mr. Devlin, walked in, his face stone-faced as usual. But his eyes were darting. Dad looked at him for a long, silent moment. What's wrong, Devlin? Everything's under control, Mr. Carter, he replied with a slight accent. Just checking on the classrooms. This wasn't part of the plan, Agent Ramirez said, signaling to the others through her earpiece. Dad stepped closer. Where exactly have you been for the last 15 minutes? The stairs. West Wing. But our people have already checked the West Wing, Dad said. His hand slowly fell to his waistband, where his gun was hidden under his jacket. Devlin's eyes lingered on my backpack for a moment, and I realized it. He hadn't just come to see what was going on here. He was looking for something, or someone. And then everything happened very quickly. Dad shouted, under the table, everyone. In the very next second, the door was smashed open. Two men in dark clothes with no insignia burst into the classroom. One of them threw something, a flash and a glint. The lights went out. The volume in my ears was so loud that I stopped hearing. But I could see. I saw my dad rush to me, covering me with his body. I saw Agent Ramirez knock the gun out of the attacker's hand. I saw Ethan pull me into the closet because Dad said, stay away, and that always meant something terrible. I was inside, dark, cramped. Ethan was breathing next to me. My heart was beating like a drum. They've come for you, he whispered. I wanted to answer, but at that moment I heard a shot. One shot, then a second, a scream, then silence again. A few minutes later, I heard my dad's voice, all clear. Take the children out. His voice was firm, but hoarse. Then there was a sharp knock on the closet. I ran out first. I saw the FBI agent, my dad, the bloody hand of one of the attackers, and Mr. Devlin, already in handcuffs. The classroom smelled of gunpowder and fear. I stood in the middle of this chaos and realized that this was no longer just about humiliation. It was about survival. They didn't just come to humiliate the truth, they came to kill it. And I was a target. My father came to me, got down on one knee, and looked me in the eye. Now you know why I never talked about my work, he said. It's not just about secrecy. It's about security. It's about you. I nodded. But another feeling was already building in me. Not fear. It was determination. I would never let them take away my voice again. The school was evacuated in 30 minutes. The work was precise. Special forces, agents wearing earpieces, bulletproof vests. Everything was like in a movie. But it was not a movie. It was my classroom, my desk, my friends. I stood among the crowd of students in the courtyard, hugging my mom, who had already arrived. Her eyes were red with tears and fear. She did not know everything yet, only that they came for me. Not just with mockery. They came with guns. "Malcolm, are you okay?" Her voice was trembling. I nodded, but a storm was raging inside. Dad was standing next to me, his hands in his pockets, his eyes scanning the crowd as if he was waiting for something else. His face was stony, but I knew he was boiling. His calm alone was an explosion, held back only by discipline. "They didn't disappear," he said quietly, as if to himself. "It was just a signal. A test of the defense." "Who?" my mom asked, squeezing my sleeve. "People who want to get to me through my son," Dad answered. "And now they know we're not the easy targets they thought we were." The same day, the FBI held a briefing. Some of it was public, a foreign attempt to penetrate the cyber infrastructure of schools. The rest was classified. But we knew. We were living in the midst of it. And I also knew that the truth wins not when it is recognized, but when it cannot be ignored. The next week, I returned to school. I was greeted as a hero with changed views. Those who used to laugh now avoided my gaze, and those who were silent now shook hands. But it was Ms. Andrews who surprised me the most. She was standing at the door when I entered the classroom. Not as usual, with her arrogant smile, but with something new in her eyes. With fear and guilt. "Malcolm," she said to me when the class was seated, "can I talk to you for a minute?" I approached, cautiously, not yet believing her voice was sincere. "I want to apologize," she said, and the words sounded unnatural coming out of her mouth. "I assumed you were lying. I let my stereotypes shape my expectations. And I was wrong." I looked at her silently. I had the urge to say, "It's too late." But I remembered my father's words, "Sometimes enemies learn. And those who learn are no longer enemies." "If you really want to change, then don't apologize to me," I replied. "Change the way you look at people like me." Her cheeks turned red, but she nodded. A few days later, I was invited to speak at a school assembly. I didn't agree right away, but my dad said, "Your voice is strong. They are listening now. Use it." I went on stage. The microphone was cold. My hands were shaking a little. Last week I was shot at because I am the son of the man they tried to stop. But long before the shot, I was shot at with words. With distrust. Doubt. With ridicule. They were not hitting my body, but my dignity. The room was silent. I saw teachers and students sitting in silence, some even wiping their eyes. I was not broken. And if any of you are sitting here now and think that your voice is not important because you are not listened to, you should know that they are not listening not because you are wrong, but because their truth has not yet met with resistance. I finished my speech. And this time, when the audience erupted in applause, it was not just a polite sound. It was a sign. We were seen. They heard us. And they would not be able to close their eyes. After my speech, the changes were tangible. And not only at school. In myself. I used to be afraid to raise my hand in class, because every word could cause ridicule. Now I knew that silence is the most dangerous weapon against the truth. I was invited to take part in a new project at the school called Voices That Have Not Been Heard. It was launched after our story. For the first time in the years of the Academy's existence, they began to speak out loud about discrimination. And not in a whisper, not behind the door, right at meetings, in classrooms, on school posters. Ms. Andrews, who had once questioned my words, now advocated for mentoring for students from less represented communities. She counseled new teachers on cultural awareness. Was she doing this out of guilt? Perhaps. But change starts with recognition. One day I was coming home from school when I saw that our yard was empty. No usual black SUV with agents. No cameras on every corner. For the first time in months, it was completely silent. "Where's the security?" I asked my dad, who was sitting on the porch with his laptop. "They were called away this morning," he replied calmly. "The threat has been lifted. All those involved in the operation have been detained. And you know what? You're safe. We are safe." I sat down next to him. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was being watched. "They thought we were weak," I said. "Yes. Because they're used to measuring strength by skin, status, money." Dad leaned back against the bench, But real strength is in resilience. The ability not to break, even when it's dark around you. I've been asked to write an essay for the local newspaper, I said after a pause, about the experience of a schoolboy who was not believed. And what will you write? My father smiled. I looked at him, not just as a father. I looked at him as an example. And I answered that sometimes the truth sounds implausible, but it doesn't need permission to exist. You just have to have the courage to say it out loud. A few weeks later, our story began to be mentioned in the news. Not because of spies or the FBI, but as an example of how a school can transform after a crisis. I became part of the Listen Before You Judge campaign, which aimed to combat school bias. I was only 11 years old, but I already knew that the truth is not a burden, but a weapon. It's the last day of the semester. I'm packing my backpack and Tyler comes up to me. He used to make fun of me every day. Now he's different. Hey, Malcolm. His voice is tentative. Your speech was strong. If it's okay, can I join your club? The one about the voices. I look at him. And instead of disdain, I say, real change starts with the hardest decisions. Start with this one. Welcome. That night, I stood at the window of my room and looked at the sky. No cameras. No fear. Only peace and clarity. I was no longer a child who suffered in silence. I was someone who stood up, not just for myself, but for those who are not yet heard. Moral: this is not just a story about spies and danger. It's about racial prejudice, which can be just as destructive. It's about how easy it is to doubt the truth when it comes from someone who doesn't fit into your ideas. But true strength is not in meeting expectations. It's in being yourself, even when the world says you're nothing.